Okay, there we go. All right.
Awesome. So are we ready to get started then?
Yep. You got it.
Perfect. We are the MST and PST group. So we've got Karina, we have Jarrett, Nathan, Charisse, who should be joining us later, and then I'm Elliot. Our study that we replicated is by Howard Willis and Benjamin Mason. The title of it is The Implementation of a Self-Monitoring Application to Improve On-Task Behavior. It's a high school pilot study done in 2014. The purpose of this study was to investigate the use of what's called an iConnect application. So they wanted to see if the high schoolers would monitor their on-task behavior and whether or not that would increase on-task behavior and decrease disruptive behavior. So this study included 2 high school students, both with difficulties engaging in on-task behaviors according to their general education teacher. The first student was a 14-year-old male with a learning disability. They did not specify the exact learning disability. However, they did say that he may have a mood disorder as well. The second student is a 15-year-old male with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. The study used an AB-AB reversal single subject research design. So they started off with baseline. In this, they did not have any requests to self-monitor. Then they moved to the intervention phase, where we had the introduction of the iConnect app, which I'll go into a little bit more later. And then we moved to the withdrawal phase, so any request to self-monitor was removed. And then finally, intervention 2 with the reintroduction of the iConnect app. They had 15-minute observation periods during the 1-hour science class. And then data was collected on both disruptive behavior and on-task behavior. So disruptive behavior was counted as frequency, and then on-task was duration. On-task behavior was defined as the percentage of observed duration in which the students were passively or actively engaged with instructional content via oral response, raising hand, responding to teacher instruction, writing, reading, or otherwise completing an assigned task. And then they define disruptive behavior as frequency of the participant engaging in behavior that was contrary to the behavioral expectations of the assigned task that could potentially disrupt instruction. So the independent variable was the iConnect application. So this is our intervention. They had the Android application on a 5-inch Samsung Galaxy tablet. They disabled any cellular connectivity or internet access. They began the intervention phase with a 20-minute training session. So this included like how to use the app, and then definitions of on-task versus off-task behavior with examples and non-examples. The iConnect app would have notifications about every 5 minutes. Well, exactly, I suppose every 5 minutes, fixed interval schedule. There would be a visual prompt in the form of a flashing screen. So tones and vibrations were disabled so that they did not distract other students. And then accuracy of self-monitoring on task behavior was not tracked. So they didn't want to determine whether or not they were saying, yes, I am on task, or no, I am not on task when the notification would pop up. The results of this study showed that each student increased significantly in their on-task behavior. So for student 1, the baseline average was 51% and then increased to 95% in the first intervention phase. In the withdrawal phase, student 1 actually dropped below the initial baseline levels and then increased back to where he was for intervention in the second intervention phase. And we see something very similar with student 2. So baseline average was about 18% with a huge jump to 91% in the intervention phase. And then withdrawal was not as significant of a decrease. However, they did go back up to the 91% with the second intervention phase. As for disruptive behavior, that did not have as much of a jump, but there was a difference. So for student 1, baseline average was about 2.2 instances of disruptive behavior within the 15-minute period. Intervention, his average was 1. Withdrawal, it jumped back up to 2. And then the second intervention phase was 0.4 within the 15-minute period. And then student 2, we had 4.3 instances of disruptive behavior, jumping down to 1.5 for intervention, and then going back up to 3.8 for withdrawal. And then the second intervention was also very low with only 0.6 instances per 15-minute interval. The inter-observer agreement for this study was less than I think is typically standard for APA or ABA. They did 20% of total sessions. They calculated the percentage of agreement, so agreements divided by agreements plus disagreements, and then multiplied by 100. On-task behavior results were averaging about 92%, and disruptive behavior results averaging about 88%. Fidelity for this study, fidelity data were collected for all observation sessions. They included baseline and withdrawal. They assessed the proper use of the iConnect app and appropriate device use during interventions. And for baseline and withdrawal phases, they made sure that there was no use of self-monitoring, whether it be with the app, paper, or any other method for those phases. They also included treatment acceptability, and this included an iConnect rating form for the intervention, which was given to participants. They wanted to see the ease of the intervention and its efficacy. And then they also had the intervention rating profile, which was given to the teacher to assess acceptability of the intervention. They did not show the results of either of these forms. They just kind of mentioned that this was part of what they did. So some of the discussion that we have, the overall purpose, I mentioned it before, examining the effects of self-monitoring technology on disruptive behavior and on task behaviors for students with disabilities. And it assesses the participant and the teacher's perception of the efficacy of the intervention. Some unique qualities about this study is that it was in a general high school education setting. Previous research has shown that it is not done specifically in this setting for general education. They also used longer intervals for self-monitoring prompts. So the intervals were every 5 minutes, which was different from the 30 seconds to 1 minute that has been shown in previous studies. And there was actually no use of reinforcement for using the iConnect app. The iConnect app was just the intervention. There was no reinforcement for getting it correct or incorrect or just using it in general. Some limitations of this study is lack of generalization probes. So they did not test to see if this would generalize to other classes. They only did it in that one science class. And there was no variation of interval length. So 5 minutes versus 30 seconds versus 3 minutes, they didn't vary that at all. And then academic achievement was not considered, so they did not test whether or not the iConnect app intervention improved their academic scoring.
So a majority of our supporting literature kind of all ended up the same. There was the Ramez Lapointe study where they basically used on task in a box, which is basically this kind of kit for self-monitoring. It has like videos, electronic device, all sorts of stuff in there to basically increased on-task behavior, similar to everything Elliot just said in the previous study. They did it with 3 classes of 18 fourth graders and then 2 third grade classes. They were measuring on-task behavior and work completion as their dependent variable. Their independent variables, like I said, was that on-task in a box set, had the motivator device, video modeling, just kind of basically explaining the on-task stuff and how to use the motivator. And then they had group contingencies placed on the on-task stuff class-wide. So their results, they all increased in their on-task behavior from baseline intervention, 149 to 71, 63 to 80, 60 to 86. Their work completion had varied results. Classroom 1, I think, went up. Classroom 2 is variable, and 3 actually went down. So the conclusion basically for this one, that on-task in a box was a successful tool for increasing on-task behavior in elementary classrooms.
The Moore et al. 2013 study was very similar, and its purpose was to examine the effectiveness of self-monitoring strategies on-task behavior with students that specifically do not have a diagnosed disability. So this was again in the general ed classroom. Their participants were 3 male participants between the ages of 12 and 13, so middle school students. The dependent variable is that on-task behavior, and the independent variables were a self-monitoring system called Motivator, and then they had a visual aid tracking system they used, which was a list of what on-task behaviors look like, a visual card, and a couple other supplies like that. Their results showed an average of the on-task behavior went from 39% in baseline to 78% in intervention, and then actually continued to go up in maintenance to 83%. They found that Motivator and the combined self-monitoring program was described by the students and the teachers involved as easy to use, effective, and that it generalized to other areas. The Otero and Hott research was again very similar. They wanted to determine if on-task behavior and accuracy of self-monitoring was affected by contingent reinforcement. So they used the same motivator program and self-monitoring materials, but they included contingent reinforcement in some phases, and in some phases, no contingent reinforcement. Their participants were 3 students, 2 Caucasian and 1 Hispanic, and all were identified by their teachers as at risk of failure in their studies, their academic failure. There were multiple students offered up for this study, but they wanted specifically gen ed students in the elementary age range. For 2 of the 3 students, reinforcement, so that contingent reinforcement with the self-monitoring caused improvements, more improvements than without the reinforcement and just the self-monitoring and motivator. The remaining student had pretty just like across the bar equal results. In conclusion, they noticed that the differential reinforcement wasn't consistent in causing an influence, whereas it was consistently improved by the motivator software, this self-monitoring software. And in this study, they did not see a generalization of the academic improvements.
So the next study was Amato Zek et al., and it was very similar to all the previous supporting literature. The purpose of the study was also including self-monitoring as allowing individuals to identify their level of engagement in any target behavior. For this particular study, the participants were 3 fifth grade students, 1 was female, 2 were male. In the study, it did notate that the teachers did have a selection in which students were picked for this particular study, it based off of their work completion, based off of work performance as well. So the dependent variable was on-task behavior, similar to the replication study. And the independent variable was also the motivator device, which delivered electronic vibrations that prompted them to monitor their self-monitoring and their engagement in their target behavior. The results for the study in this particular literature were more of an overall discussion, and that was that the mean of on-task behavior increased with a range of 55 to more than 90% of on-task behavior with the addition of the motivator device. The study concluded that self-monitoring as a whole was an effective tool to supporting behavior change for on-task behavior.
So in the Blood et al. Study, again, similar video modeling used, self-monitoring system to improve on-task behavior. It used a 10-year-old fifth grade male. Like the original study that we replicated, they were looking at on-task behavior and disruptive. So video modeling was their style, coupled with the self-monitoring, and then they also used video modeling separately. In baseline, the on-task was 44%, and then video modeling only up to 81%, and then the coupled intervention with 99%. Disruptive behavior started at 40 in baseline, and then moved to 11 with the video modeling, and then 0 with the self and the video. So conclusion, the video modeling effectiveness was enhanced with the self-monitoring as well.
So the purpose of the replication project was to examine the efficacy of a self-monitoring app, which for our study was the iConnect app on-task behavior for a group of, in our case, graduate students living in various locations.
The participants for this study were 5 graduate students enrolled in specifically ABA coursework online through BSU. Our ages ranged from 26 years old to 39 years old. The gender identification for our participants, we had 2 female participants, 2 male participants, and 1 that identifies as non-binary. And then the location for these for all 5 participants, 3 of them were in Mountain Standard Time Zone with 2 in Pacific Standard Time Zone. And then the settings for our replication study, Elliot did their videos, kind of monitoring on-task behavior at their desk in their home office. Jarrett was at his desk in his home spare bedroom. Remodeling shifted to, because of remodeling, they shifted to the living room couch or kitchen table. Sharice did her work in her work office or home spare bedroom. Nathan worked at his desk in his home bedroom, and then Karina worked in her office at home or at work. And our materials that we used included an iPad or tablet with the iConnect app downloaded. We used study materials for the designated coursework, which would be the SPCE 611 coursework specifically. We required a webcam for recording our sessions to take data later. And we also needed a timer for collecting duration data, as well as a YouTube account for uploading videos, for collecting IOA data, and then finally a Zoom account for the iConnect training meeting.
The original study had 2 tracked behaviors. We chose to track just on-task behavior for our replication, as disruptive behavior wasn't really applicable to us as graduate students. Our definition of on-task behavior was the duration, and we chose in seconds, in which students were passively or actively engaging in the coursework for this class, SPCE 611. We chose to use the active and passive engagement to replicate our original case study. Our active engagement, we decided, was completing assignments or reading or studying for the course, while passive engagement included watching the videos that are given for this course. A non-example would be engaging in coursework unrelated to this specific class, as we all agreed upon this in our original proposal.
So for the data collection, similar to the operational definition, the original study used two different methods of data collection. However, because we chose the initial one for just monitoring on-task behavior, we chose to do duration recording. The interval lengths for our sessions were 15 minutes. Procedure for data collection included observing the recording of the session. So at the start of the session, you would start the timer when the video began. You would pause the timer immediately when the participant would stop engaging in any form of on-task behavior. At that time, when the participant of the study began to re-engage in on-task behavior, they would then resume the timer to continue data collection. At the end of this, they would convert the total duration of on-task behavior into seconds, rounding to the nearest second. We did adjust our project protocol just a little bit because of time's sake, so the observer and data collector for sessions remained the same as the participant.
So the design of our replication was the ABAB reversal single subject research design, which proceeded through starting with baseline, intervention, which was our iConnect app, withdrawal, and then the reintroduction of that iConnect app. Strengths of this would be that it demonstrates functional relationship between the independent and dependent variables, and then the reintroduction of the intervention displays results of replication.
So for the baseline and treatment phases, our baseline and withdrawal phases were similar. The interval time for the sessions were the same at 15-minute observations. With the baseline phase, we had no requested self-monitor, so there was no use of the iConnect app at all. During the withdrawal phase, we did remove the self-monitoring application altogether. Data was collected on duration of on-task behavior, and we required a minimum of 5 consecutive sessions of stable data before moving to the implementation of intervention phases and the reintroduction of intervention phases. For those other two, which are the intervention and reintroduction to intervention phases, we did prior to entering into those phases, we had a 20-minute iConnect app training session via Zoom. That way we could all get familiar with the app and how to use it. We also had 15-minute observation session periods, and then we used the iConnect app for both of those phases as well, while still continuing to collect duration data on task behavior.
So our IOA data, we set the goal to at least collect 25% of the total session study, which again was that increase from that 20% of theirs. The sessions that we selected were varied and randomized. We tried to at least get one each phase. A lot of us kind of went over that 25. So then each participant went in a line basically and served as a secondary observer to another participant. That's what Karina was saying we adjusted. And then our IOA requirements were to at least hit 80% of agreement. And then our formula is right there with the shorter duration divided by longer, then times 100, and that would get our percentage. I think this is me as well. Yes, okay. So then our procedural integrity, we basically established that we had to know our behavioral definitions. And so we all kind of verified with each other that we knew that. And then in our baseline and withdrawal phases, we made sure that the person we were observing is not using any self-monitoring. And then this was any of that confirmation between that and the behavioral definition was sent through email or text message. Then in the intervention and reintroduction, basically just verifying that we're logging into the iConnect app and utilizing it, basically following through the prompts. And again, some of that was verified due to not necessarily using the chime. Like for me personally, I used the flash. So on any of those sessions, I just confirmed with Sharice that I was using the flash function.
So moving into results, I had a total IOA of 96% across 68.7% of my total sessions. My secondary observer was Jarrett. I had a baseline mean of 414 seconds of on-task behavior with a range of 256 to 530 seconds. My intervention mean was 611 seconds with an intervention range of 474 to 684 seconds. For my withdrawal phase, I had a mean of 550 seconds of on-task behavior with a withdrawal range of 498 to 647 seconds.
So I was observed by Sharice. When I was going through mine, I got through baseline at a pretty stable level here with that mean of 661 seconds. On task behavior was obviously relatively stable until this session. I don't exactly remember what was happening, but apparently I was very off task. Obviously, eventually it stabilizes here. So in that first intervention, my mean for on task was 836. Then when I got to withdrawal, it kind of went back to that 661 coincidentally. And then here, obviously, you'll see that these are descending in a row, but it's in such a tight window that I've moved on to this phase and will be taking that. And then if you can see too, my total IOA was 98.31 across 66.11% of total sessions, with kind of rallying around that 97% to that 99%.
For my data, I had a total IOA of 98.79% across 70% of total sessions, with my secondary observer being Karina. I had a baseline average of 651 seconds before moving on to intervention, where I had an average of 838 seconds. When I went to withdrawal, my general average was higher at 743 seconds of on-task behavior, but still lower than any intervention phase. And then when I took my reintroduction to intervention, I had an average of 870 seconds.
I had my total IOA as 99.9% across 25% of total sessions. For intervention and withdrawal, we have the 100% IOA with baseline being 94 or 99.4%, and reintroduction is also at 100%. My secondary observer was Nathan. We can see that my baseline mean was 649 seconds. It was trending downward at this time. When I moved into the intervention phase, I was pretty stable at 900 seconds. When I moved back to the withdraw phase, we dropped down to just above my baseline mean at 678 seconds. And then with the reintroduction of the iConnect app, I also was consistent at the full 15 minutes or 900 seconds.
And this is Sharice's data. So their IOA was 98% across 46.6% of total sessions, with a IOA of 99 in baseline, 97 in intervention, 98. They haven't progressed to reintroduction, but as you can see, the baseline mean increases when it's put in intervention, and then decreases again, actually lower than baseline levels in the withdrawal phase. And I think we might end the meeting there and hop on another one to continue since we're out of time. So do that.